I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking to you with Dr. Lynette Reed. Dr. Lynette Reed is an educator, an author, a podcaster. She also dabbles in photography and songwriter, but she has a model in which helps businesses, business leaders, and individuals help them get focused in their life, help them set expectations so that they are not tossed to and fro in an ever changing world. And I want to find out from Dr. Reed how these expectations and focuses in life tend to fall short in people's lives. So listen with me today as we talk with Dr. Lynette Reed. I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Lynette Reed. Good morning, young lady.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderfully well. I know that you're a gracious lady. I have made a couple of mistakes here thus far, and you still have a smile on your face, and you're still willing to go forth. So, as I mentioned, I did a interview or a introduction to you just a moment ago. And could you give us a proper introduction, just something to fill in what you are doing now, and then we'll get more into the reads.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been doing the work that I'm doing for about 20 years now, and it's really talking about how do you connect from one person to another. A lot of the people I work with are in business. I do a lot of writing. It's really just kind of a journey that I took to get to the place I am now. And I love what I do, so that makes things even better.
As you mentioned to me a moment ago that you were a speech pathologist for the first part of your career, and now you're into communications. And I said
Yes.
that I am quite nervous knowing that you are well in tuned with proper communication. So I'm just hoping I can hold my own. But Dr.
Well, you're
Reed,
doing just fine. And like I said, I haven't done that for probably, oh my gosh, 15 years. It's been a long time. I don't use any of that really very much except for the communication part.
well, it's like well, like they say riding a bike, but for me, playing football. So I used to play
Yeah,
football. I don't play football very well now, but I can see when it's wrong.
right.
It's
Yeah,
not,
exactly,
I can
exactly.
see when it's not done properly. But Dr. Reed, can you bring us back into your first, what would have been your first job, or maybe something from your youth where you maybe got out of the house and did something a little differently than going to school?
Yeah, well, I guess going back all the way, we did used to do the lemonade stands when I was a kid. That was pretty popular back then. So
You say
that would probably
we.
be my
Who who
first.
who would have been we? Just you and friends, or
Me, I had my friends. Sometimes we would have a lemonade stand together, or sometimes I would just do one by myself.
yeah?
Back in those days, you could pretty much sit outside by yourself without your parents out there, so you could do it on your own.
I could see it. I mean, there is, you see some news recordings of people doing it now, but it seems like it's a tougher gig nowadays, especially with
It
Corona.
is,
See a
yeah.
kid out
But
there with full masks and gloves and a
yeah,
parent with
yeah. Yeah, well,
helicopter.
but you can use credit cards now. We've actually seen that where there's kids out and they have their little credit card machine so they can have you pay for it that
That's
way.
true. I
So
saw it wasn't a kid at someone's window one day, but they knew the person was coming to ask for something. And they're like, oh, sorry, we don't have any change. And he pulls out the credit card machine. Like, yeah, they got you there.
it's a whole new world. Yeah, yeah.
When you did that lemonade stand, what was your motivation to get out of the house? Was there, you're just like, oh, this might be fun, or you wanted some money, or someone said, get out?
Well, I think it's probably but a little combination, it's fun to, put together the lemonade, get your stand set up. And then of course, the money always is a little bit of a motivator. I think that's, like any business, you're trying to, bring some income into your life. So that's probably the main motivation for
So
things.
along the way, I know that you had your first job, and you can reiterate what that was, out of college. But was there any other small sort of thing that you would have done up until high school?
No, not really. I thought we were pretty. We didn't really do a lot of work like that. I mean, I
Mhm,
worked at home,
mhm.
doing chores,
Yeah.
but it wasn't really considered. It was my job at home, but I didn't have to go outside of that for income at the
You
time.
know, out of the few interviews I've done thus far, nobody said chores.
Oh yeah,
And I think it's something that, I don't want to just brush by and say, oh, yeah, chores. But, a responsibility in the home. I know my children are 7 and 11. And as they grow, I mean, I remember one gentleman once saying, you know, at 4, they were able to scrub the toilets. Like, whether you do it good or, not so good, it's getting done. But there are chores in the home, like for my listeners, for
yeah,
people to, whether they have children or they're just growing up themselves, opposed to
right.
just sitting around and not doing anything, thinking mom or dad or brother or sister, someone's, or that just gets magically taken care of. To take on a little bit of responsibility is something that, obviously, in your case, doctor, it was a good thing to have chores for you growing up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think, depending on how, of course, it's set up, but,
Yeah.
whenever you're doing chores, it's teaching you a work ethic, and it's teaching you how to be a part of the whole, as far as in your household. If your parents do all the work, then you're really kind of letting them have a belief system that things are going to be done for them, and that they're not going to have to work for things, regardless of whether they're doing it for money or not. And I know a lot of people have a nice system set up where the children actually get to pick their chores,
Mm-hmm.
and they have like little amounts of money, like a nickel or a
Yeah.
quarter or whatever it is, and they pick which chores they want to do for the week, and then they get quote unquote paid for it. So
That's great.
yeah, so I think even if you're doing something like being responsible for cleaning up your room, or
Yeah.
but making it fun too, where it's a good happy memory, because chores doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, you
No.
know.
It's no, there it's that's a great idea to set it out and even let them choose, especially if you have two
Yeah,
children, right? Like, first captain, first pick or something along those lines. And I'm over in Asia now, in South Korea, and I find a lot of children are not given that responsibility. Like,
yeah,
it tends to be a mom will handle it, or someone's going to handle it, and you just go study. This is
yeah,
even from elementary school, where you would think that, play would be a bigger priority, but
yeah.
it's not. Not at least as big a priority as studying, but chores and taking your own responsibilities, they think it's too much of a burden for them to do
Yeah.
those
Well,
extra.
and I think too, you could make the argument for your studies being a chore. If
That's
that's a
true.
priority your parents have, then, and they're saying, okay, look, we're going to take care of this work, but your job is to take care of your school, make sure that
It's a
your
good
grades
point.
are up, doing extra, things. So yeah, so I think that's the challenge, is to find ways to define it, especially with the world the way it is right now. We're so global. I mean, here we are talking to each other all the way across the world,
Yeah.
and so we're learning different cultures that we wouldn't have learned 15, 20 years ago, because we would not have been able to talk to people in different parts of the country. So
You
yeah, so I think that you're right. That's a big challenge, is, how do you define that, and make it work for your place?
Yeah, that's a good point you make with defining it. So rather than just saying go do your work, and not saying, well, we're doing this, and this is for you to do, and this is where we're going to, balance out some of the
Right.
responsibility in the
Right.
home, like, without sitting. That's a really great point of making sure you define it, not just assume it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Because also when you think about little kids, they don't really. This will be my speech path sticking in, is they don't really think in terms developmentally of of critical thinking, and you're teaching that to them. And so as you're growing, you're learning things that you did not know. And so I think a lot of times parents assume that kids know what they know because we're all, human beings, but really kids need to understand why they're doing things to make them better able to integrate it into who they are and what they're trying to work on.
So
So,
with you, Dr. Reed, how did you start to figure this out for your path? And when did that start for, figuring out where you want to go to university and what you wanted to take? How did that start to shape?
well, I kind of fell into it. It really wasn't something that I wanted to do per se. It wasn't like a lifelong career, but at the time I was thinking more in terms of, I was not in a wealthy family, and so I had to think in terms of making money to, pay the bills, things like that. And so when I started school in my undergrad, it was more about how do I get a job quickly so that I can get out there and make money. And so I chose the profession because it was very easy to get into it and to kind of follow along that path. And I did that for a number of years, just kind of thinking in terms of what do I need to do to make a living. And then I fulfilled myself in other ways with, hobbies.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so I
You
think
balanced
that's,
it out that way.
yeah,
How,
just kind of comes it that way.
what was your undergrad?
I'm sorry.
What did you take in your undergrad?
It was a speech pathology. It was called communication
Specifically.
sciences and disorders is what it was called. Yeah.
And what led you that way? Are you saying that you fell into that itself?
They had a really good program at the college I was living close to.
Okay.
Yeah,
It was
it wasn't like
close.
a conscious choice of, oh, let's go away to college. So yeah, I went to just a local college, and so that was kind of my trajectory.
So with that path though, that, with speech pathology and what was the proper name for it again?
It was called communication sciences and disorders.
So was
So
there a reason you ventured that way? Did you know someone with a speech
Yeah, I
disadvantage
knew a number
or
of people in the profession. Yeah, I knew a number of people in the profession, and like I said, they had a really good program at the local schools. So I decided, what the heck, let's do that. At that age, I was 17 when I graduated from college.
Mhm.
I mean, from high school, and
Mhm.
so it wasn't like I was thinking to myself, "Oh, what do I want to do?"
Yeah.
20 years from now.
Mhm.
It was more like, hey, I need a job. What would be a good, college education to have to get a job? So I just kind of randomly picked it because I'd heard, that it was a pretty good job to have, and there were plenty of them available. That's one thing you could always say about speech therapy from years ago to now is they always need them. It's very hard to find enough of them. So it was a critical need kind of thing, kind of like being a nurse or a physical therapist, things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking I interviewed someone who had a similar path to you, and she was a nurse, and it was
Yeah.
it was pretty secure. It's something she knew she can get right away, and it led her along her career as well. So for you, what was your first responsibility in your position? Were you speaking with people, or was it more administration? What?
I did. Well, I did a number of jobs starting out because I wanted to learn a bunch of different things. But then I kind of fell into working for the local hospital. And actually, what I did in that job was started to put together with my boss, who was the director, the it was called I can't remember, gosh, what do they call it? That was
Mhm.
so many years ago. It was a cleft palate team. They had what they would do is instead of having all the doctors in different places, this was back before, this was like years ago, they would have anybody who was having a critical care experience. Mine was particularly this cleft palate team because that's where they started it,
Yeah,
and have them integrate it so that it became a team effort as opposed to the person went from one doctor to the next without any
separate. Yeah.
cohesion. Yeah, so really, I had a kind of a unique job because I was doing the coordinating of the meeting and working with the parents and things like that. So that was probably probably one of the most significant jobs that I had working. I did a little bit in school systems and things like that, but that was probably where my interest lied more, was the coordination part of it, and that kind of thing.
And as you mentioned, after your third year, you were married. So you were already married and
Yeah, I was already.
graduated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
We were crazy. I don't know what we were thinking. I was 20. Yeah,
well,
so
37 years in now. So I think you picked the right man, or
yeah,
he
yeah, I
was,
did. We still like each other too, so
he
that works
married
well.
up, I think.
Yeah.
So how long did you stay into speech therapy itself from that
Oh
point?
gosh, I would say off and on for about 15 years. We waited about 7 years into the marriage to have kids, and then I had two daughters. So I worked part time doing things, but I basically stayed at home and did remote work, and then I started just kind of shifting during that
Mhm.
period of time. Where once I had kids, I started looking at it more from the perspective of, okay, I don't need the money as much anymore. Now where do I want to go? So that was
Mhm.
kind of the transitional area with that.
So it was more of a logical step, or just it gave you had more freedom to choose what you wanted.
Yeah, more freedom to choose. Yeah, yeah. But, like I said, the first part of it was kind of just learning the ropes and figuring out how I wanted, you know, lo- how I wanted to make the money. But then it shifted to, oh, okay, now we're financially pretty set. We're not, millionaires, but we're
Yeah.
doing good enough that we can have kids and I can stay home. Because I did feel like at the time that kids are, it's very important for them to learn a system of society, and I wanted to be the one to teach that to them. And
Mhm.
so I think that was an important aspect for me. So I did spend most of that period of my time uh, taking care of the kids, but I also worked. So I would, I just kind of insert children instead of studies, you know, and still working both times, but then just doing it in kind of in an integrated fashion. So,
What I know of your work, this is somewhat of the bedrock, is the foundation, starting with the proper foundation, and obviously you were trying to implement that for your own children as well.
right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So,
So when did you decide to take this step into the path that you're in now? What was the final, okay, I'm
oh
no
my
longer.
gosh. Well, yeah, it was kind of a fluke actually. I had been doing some writing. I kind of during that period of time that the kids were young, I fell into writing and doing some editing for a publishing house out of Nashville. And
Mhm.
this was back in the time before there was what was called remote work. I'm kind of showing my age here, but my
Remote
first.
work didn't exist before this year. No one
Oh,
knew
I
about
know,
it.
I
That's what
know.
it seems like anyway, but
Seriously, yeah, it's really changed. Yeah. So I used to do remote work where I would go spend, I go to Nashville 4 times a year for a week and work at the office.
mhm.
And then the rest of the time I do my work here at my house and just send it in via computer. And computers were new back then, they were, and so it was like an old, very old antiquated system. So it was like the first view of what remote work could look like. And
Mhm.
so I did that kind of as an interim thing, and then I got to where I was doing some work, trying to think of what even made me go there. I was talking to some people, and they said, "Hey, you know what you really should do? You should really go get your doctorate." And I said, "Well, what would I even think of doing that in?" And they said, "Well, there's we saw we think you would be really good in something that had to do with communications, or working with people." And I said, okay, well, I'll think about that. And about 2 weeks later, I was looking in a magazine of all things, and there was an article that was talking about a new profession that was coming out, or a new doctorate program that was coming
Mhm.
out that was called Spirituality, Sustainability, and Interreligious Dialogue. So basically, it was a world peace degree, And the guy, two of the professors were Paul Knitter and Jay McDaniel, who were both pretty big if you're in the world of religion
Mhm.
and sustainability and interreligious dialogue. These are the guys. And so I said, well, I don't really have any background in that area, but I'm going to see if I can, get in the program, and we'll just kind of see what happens. And so I just threw it out there, and sure enough, I got a call, and they accepted me into the program. I had to take a few extra classes to kind of round it out, but I got accepted into the program and just went from there.
So this is a how long did that program take? I mean,
It
minus
was
maybe bumps
about
in the road.
2.5 years, I want to say.
Okay. So
Yeah, and I
your
still had
husband
the kids
was
at home. The kids were like in middle school, and I went to my husband and said, "Okay, what do you think?" And he's like, "Whatever you want to do, we're there." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to go for it." And I had to go up to Dayton. It was up in Dayton of all places, and my brother lived in Cincinnati, so I'd fly into Cincinnati. He'd pick me up. I'd spend the weekend visiting with him, and
yeah.
then go to classes for the week, and then come back, and do once again a remote. It was a remote thing, so I did the remote that way. So remote has always been my friend. I mean, for years it has, because I was able to do things that I would have never been able to do if they had not had the remote programs that they did.
So
So
just by the time frame that you gave, without divulging your age or anything like that, but you're into 30s doing a
yeah, I
you
think I
might have just reached 30. I mean,
yeah, I think
depending
I
on
was
how you
around. I was in my 30s somewhere. Yeah, yeah.
so
I'm doing my math in my head. Yeah.
for listeners to say you did a doctor program out of nowhere. This wasn't you weren't on a path from high school, your undergrad, master's degree to do it.
Yeah.
This
No.
wasn't
No.
you lived some, you took care of your children, you raised your children, and then you jumped into a doctorate degree. So
Yes.
for people listening to say, and 30 is not the benchmark, because when I did my master's degree, there was a lady doing her master's degree who I believe went on to do her doctorate, at least a certificate, and she was 70 something.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
and the idea of, oh, I'm too old. Like, so, when we're younger, like some people say, oh, I'm 28, 29. Oh, I'm too old to do something different. No, you're not.
No, never too old. Never too old. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think something like COVID teaches us that, like, if we're not, especially if we're having difficulty with our job and we need to
Yeah.
upgrade our skills or do something different, it's never too late to do something. And I think your story in itself of having children and then changing careers and doing a doctorate is commendable.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, is thinking outside the box. I think we get in our minds and say, oh, this is all we can do, and then we never really reach out there and say, hey, let's try this. And I may be a little bit too much that way than just thinking, okay, this is
Sure.
the normal way. Just whatever you can do, because I think to myself nowadays, I'm thinking, wow, because I'm so familiar with remote work, having done it for the number of years I had. I'm thinking, why don't more companies do that? And then COVID came, and it was like it just showed everybody what the world would look like,
Hmm.
if you did have that ability to think way beyond, okay, I've got to get up in the morning, go to work, and get that done. And and to me, that's the biggest challenge too, is that every company's different, every person's different,
Hmm.
and so their path has to be their own. And doesn't mean it's wrong or right. It just means that they've got to figure out what's going to bring them joy, what's going to bring them a sense of purpose, things like that. So,
After your PhD, how did that pivot you into your new career?
well, that was the funny thing, is originally I thought it would be more of a religious context, because it
Hmm.
was, spirituality, sustainability, and a religious dialogue. Most people think of those things as
Yes.
religion. And for me, it was always a little bit different. I was kind of the belief that spirituality was something everybody had. And so when I actually did my doctorate work, my dissertation was on spirituality. And so one of the things I learned in all of that was that uh, when you're talking spirit, you're talking breath. Those are the roots that go together. So for me, it always kind of came back to when I got to my doctorate was with every breath you take, you get to decide what you're going to do with it. You're either going to strengthen things or you're going to fracture them. And so if you use that as the core element of anything you do, then it's gonna build whatever you want on top of it. And so for me, that was kind of the turning point. And talking to people like Paul Knitter and Jay McDaniel just, opened doors that I would have never imagined because they had such a knowledge base of those types of things. And so at that point is where I started saying, okay, if spirit is breath and we're building blocks, then everything basically falls on top of that. And so that kind of became the premise. But then the challenge became, okay, so if I say spirituality, people automatically think either religion or crystals, believe it or not. So I had to figure out a way, how do you integrate the vocabulary to make it so that you could communicate this very visceral experience into something tangible that people could use for work, for their daily lives, things like that. So
So
that
is
kind of the turning point. Yeah.
so is this how you created the work that you do now and the model that you developed?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly where it started.
So can you give us an idea of what that is and what it is you present to organizations, leaders, and individuals?
Yeah, it's actually three things, and the way I found it was whenever I was doing my dissertation, I was noticing, what strengthens things and what fractures things. What behaviors do we have that strengthen either a person, a group, a company, a city,
Mhm,
whatever,
mhm,
and what fractures it. And the three things I found that with almost 100% um, uh, authenticity were words and actions match. And
mhm.
that's a really big one because if you think about it, if your words and actions don't match, then authenticity kind of falls, trust
Yeah.
falls, because if you don't do what you say you're going to do,
Mhm.
or if you're not living an authentic life, then you're going to always be fracturing yourself. You're going to be fracturing the people around you, and fracturing the organization as a whole. And so, like for instance, with companies, if I say, if you say, okay, my employees are important, but then you're always criticizing your employees or you're not taking care of them,
Mm.
then your words and actions aren't matching. And so, what are people going to believe about your company? And you see this in real life where people
Mhm.
just say things because they want to comfort people or make them feel like they're on board, but then they turn around and do something different. And that's where you get the fracturing and the lack of authenticity,
Yeah.
hurt your brand, hurt your, and then it hurts you as your core person, because if you're not being authentic to what you're believing, and finding ways to word it, where you're expressing yourself in a way that doesn't fracture people, then that's one of the big core elements. The other one is that you identify who you want to be as a person as far as adjectives. So, like for instance, if I was going to meet with somebody, probably one of the first things I would say is, okay, who do you want to be as a person? Think about action adjectives that you can use, that you can live out. So it would be things like friendly, helpful, caring, empathetic, efficient, those types of things, because you can control those things. And in a world where a lot of things are out of control, especially now, with the craziness that we have in our lives, if you have something that you can use as your base for your behavior, then it's going to help you to strengthen who you are as a person, because all of your actions not only have to match what you say you're going to do, but they also have to match these words you've chosen. So
Mhm.
for instance, if I say one of my words is to be friendly, and then I go scowling at people all day,
Mhm.
am I going to feel good about myself? How's that going to make me connect to myself? Whereas if a bad situation happens and I say, okay, one of my words is friendly, and then I say, okay, this terrible thing just happened. all right, now I have a choice to make. I can't control the situation. I can't control what's around me, but I can control how I'm going to act. And so I can say, all right, I want to be friendly in this situation. Maybe direct, maybe express my frustration, but do it in a friendly way or do it in a caring way.
And this is
Uh,
where that breath comes into play.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, where you're saying, okay, with every breath, so I always laugh when they say count to 10, take a deep breath. Well, that's basically what they're saying is pause for a minute and think about what action you want to take here
Hmm.
that's going to support those words you've chosen for yourself. And then make sure your actions match those words.
Hmm.
And so that kind of pulls that all together. And you can see it kind of creates a little cycle in your life where every time frustrating things happen, especially, since you have young kids, sometimes kids are just all over the place and you're like, oh, and if you just say, okay, take a breath. All right. What
It's
actions
usually
do I
okay.
want to teach my kids?
Hmm.
How do I want to teach my kids to do this? Because they are going to mimic. And so if you show them, hey, when you're frustrated, be friendly, then that's
Hmm.
something you're not only doing for yourself, but you're teaching your kids how to do. And then they can learn that. And my poor daughters, I have two daughters that are, now, grown, but they were kind of my guinea pigs for the younger version of it. So they
Hmm.
had to put up with it all growing up. So they were good sports about it. So, but then the third one is, uh, what I used to call where your expectations meet reality, and you have to align them. And it actually came because I was talking to a counselor once, and they said, the further away from reality your expectations become, the more distressed you will become. And so to me, I thought to myself, okay, so if you want to not be distressed, then you have to align your beliefs with reality. That doesn't mean you can't dream for things or try for things that are outside of the box. It just means that, if there's a law or if something's happening that you're not going to be able to change, then you have to think from the world of, okay, this is the reality of this situation that I can't change. And then use that as a basis for where you're going forward. And those three things kind of work in a cycle together with each other. So that kind of was what I started finding. And then I've been practicing it and showing people it for now probably 15, 20 years. And it still remains very consistent. And I
Hmm.
think it's because it comes from this basis of spirit, which has to do with how do you connect with yourself? How do you connect with others? And how do you connect with the world? That's that connectivity that you're looking for whenever you're looking to do work or family or whatever it is you're trying to do.
So from your work, what I guess from the micro or from the macro, what types of changes are you able to see yourself with these organizations, leaders, and individuals?
Oh, I think the biggest one is you bring a sense of peace and calm to the workplace. You bring authenticity to the workplace. You bring uh, cohesiveness to
Yeah.
the workplace. And for people, a lot of times the way that I'm coming into a company is there's been a conflict or
Hmm.
somebody's upset about something or there's been a war between two people. And so my job is to go in and try to figure out how to bring those people back into a place of cohesion. You know what I mean? What I'll do is I'll train the people and teach them the model, and then they use the model at work. And so, imagine a company where people's words and actions match, and everybody has a defined word. Like for instance, a lot of times I'll say to the company, if I'm doing a team thing, is pick a group as a team, pick a word. How are y'all going to work with each other? Is it going to be, are you going to be friendly to each other, compassionate to each other? What's that going to look like whenever you get frustrated with each other in the group? And so you're going back to that whole idea of there's so many individual people with different passions and different belief structures. How do you integrate that? And that goes into the whole discussion about diversity, inclusion, and all of those things too, because if you're using the model, you don't have to worry about diversity and
Hmm.
inclusion because everybody is on an equal footing as long as their behaviors are managed in that, on that path. So, it touches on a lot of stuff.
There are probably, you know, it doesn't matter how many ways you try to help some people, they're not going to be changed. So you
Yeah.
probably have some experiences with that, but it would be interesting to see you go into a company that, as you said, might have had a fight or two people were arguing or just something blew up. And then you go in there, and how hard is it for you to even, open the door of the company and you can go in to present yourself as someone who's going to help heal the company, and how unreceptive these people at the, arms crossed are like, okay, what's she going to do for us?
Yeah.
Do you have lots of experiences with that, but then as you speak and you present your material that you can see them relaxing and this working?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, you know, when I talk to people who do like-minded things like I do, because there
Mhm,
are, people out here who do this type of work. One of the things that we find as a challenge is a lot of people don't want to learn it. A lot of times whenever I'm first coming into a company, I'm doing it because the boss has said, sorry, you have to do it. You know what I mean? And so I think it's actually rare many times when you find somebody who truly, truly says, oh my gosh, I want to change myself as a person. You know
"Pick
what I mean?
me, pick me."
Yeah, yeah. So I think to me, that's one of the things that has shifted, I think, a lot with COVID is that people are starting to realize that more spiritual component of,
Mhm,
okay, we are interconnected. We've actually seen a visual representation of how completely connected as a society we are with the COVID, because it
mhm,
started in one place, and you can see the impact that it's had. Now imagine, now take COVID and turn it into a negative behavior or an unkind way of talking to somebody or something like that, and it's just as fracturing, but you don't see it physically like you do. And so to me, I think the challenge is showing these people that this does truly, truly impact the way their business is run, the way their home life is. All of these things are interconnected, not unlike the physical viruses that you see. It
mhm.
is a emotional virus, so to speak. And so I think things change as society changes. I'll be very interested to see what happens post COVID as far as that. But, it's funny, it never really bothered me. I guess from the way I've always viewed my world, it's always been just go try something. And,
Mm.
if it works, great. If not, you just say, well, that was an epic failure, move on. And so when people are presented to me who are very upset or hostile towards me, it doesn't really bother me because I've done the model long enough now
Mhm.
that when somebody makes me feel a little distressed with their behavior, I can really quickly go back and say, okay, who do I want to be as a person? I want to be, friendly
Yeah.
and,
Mhm.
helpful. And so I just kind of draw myself back into those words, which is taking that breath and saying, okay, these are the words I'm going to use to deal with this difficult situation. And I think, if you look at leaders who are very successful in organizations, a lot of them inherently have these behaviors integrated into who they are as people, because you don't have to necessarily teach it to people. A lot of people have it already kind of pre-wired into their system, and then society plays a role in all that too. So uh,
It's funny because I'm thinking maybe it's not a good way, but if you were a pest control person and someone said there was, a venomous snake underneath the porch, or there's a rat over there and you had to put your hand in and something bit you, you're like, yep, you're right. I do need to get the right things. In some way, I'm not saying the leaders or individuals are pests or rats, but if you get that negative reaction to you, you really know you're needed. Like it's
yeah,
evidence that you are needed here for this situation if they're resistant to
yeah.
welcoming you on board.
Well, and that's the thing that I think is the biggest challenge with stuff like this is that you have to recognize that it's not your job to fix people.
Hmm.
It's your job to say, "Hey, here's a tool for you to put in your
Yeah.
toolbox if you want to change as a person." And if they don't want to change, then the decision becomes, Do they stay at the company? Do they continue to just keep the negative attitude there? Because you can't just say to somebody, hey, don't do that anymore, or you're going to get fired. You know what I mean? And then they're going to stop doing it, but there's going to always be that underlying, behavior because they're not happy. And one thing I find that helps me too is that I am a pretty firm believer, although I have no proof or research on this, is
Mhm.
that fear is a lot of times a motivator when people are acting that way. I
Mm.
find that the more fearful they are of something, the more they become uh, aggressive. It's that
Mhm.
reptilian
Adverse, yeah.
reaction of fight or flight.
Mhm.
Well, if you've got somebody who's being incredibly passive aggressive or being very loud and attacking you, my thought is, well, that probably is related a lot to that fight or flight mentality of I'm afraid of this situation and
Mhm.
what's happening, and so therefore I'm going to protect myself so I don't quote unquote die.
Yeah.
So
There's a wound
easier
there.
to be
Yeah.
passionate, yeah, whenever you're thinking, okay, if this person is that fearful that they're attacking me, who really cannot do them any harm, then what's their story? What's making them fearful of this?
Dr. Reed, what is, I guess, besides COVID, unless this doesn't change what you do because you do remote work,
Yeah.
what does a typical week look like for you? So are you completely into helping out these organizations and people, or are you also doing your writing and podcasting? What does a typical week look like for you?
Oh yeah, well, pretty much all of the above. Yeah, I really never know what my week is going to look like. Some weeks I'm doing more training. Some weeks I'm doing more writing. Some weeks I'm doing like research. A lot of times I'll do research. I like to kind of keep up on what's going on. Sometimes I'm doing things like this where I'm doing more podcast or
Mhm.
visiting with people. What's really been nice is with COVID, more and more people are technologically savvy as far as doing Zoom meetings.
Mm.
And so I've gotten to have a lot more discussions with people from different countries. Normally I was kind of staying more in the United States, but I've had more like us, where I've had more discussions with people from different parts of the world, which is so interesting because, when you're factoring in the work that I do, especially in a global world, culture plays a huge role in it. I can remember in high school, I had a wonderful Spanish teacher, and that was a big thing she taught in the class that really stuck with me all these years, was that when you're learning a language, you're not only learning the words and the vocabulary, but you're
Mhm.
also learning the culture,
Mhm.
because the things that we might do in one part of the world may be an insult in another part of the world, or there's a different way of seeing things, and that kind of helps shape my view on even in a city. Like if I live in a very small town outside of Austin, Texas, and I live in and the culture here is very different than when I go into Austin,
Mhm.
or when I go to Dallas, which is where my kids live. And so, even that close, our cultures really shift in how people think and do things. So that plays a role in how we communicate.
I understand living in South Korea how things can be done differently, and it takes appreciation and
Yeah,
patience to understand how things can be done differently, but still done right,
yeah,
opposed to thinking we're always right. So with your
exactly.
writing and being an educator and a leader, and also, you know, I think you're into photography and songwriting. What is
Yeah, yeah.
what is something that brings you a little disdain, or what is difficult about some of the things that you do? What is most difficult?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I think I've been doing it long enough that the working of it's not. I think that the biggest challenge I find is that since it's not how do I put it? It's not a mainstream idea. It's not a mainstream way of looking at the world. Right now, we're kind of, in my view of it, we're more binary thinking.
Mm-hmm.
As you look at Facebook and the politics and things like that. It's very much us versus them here in
Yeah.
the United States, and very
Polarizing. Yeah.
divergent. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so to me, we're not really thinking in terms of how do we strengthen and connect the world. How do we strengthen and connect our politics? How do we
Hmm.
strengthen and connect all of these things that are going on in our world to make us a stronger place? So I don't think that the focus is on that. And so the vocabulary is not really there. So for
Hmm.
instance, if I say spirituality, there's so many images. Nobody thinks, oh, connectivity of self. Well, not nobody, but a lot of people don't think spirituality of, self connection, connection to other people, and connection to the world. It's more of a vocabulary barrier because we don't have a mainstream set of words for putting this into place and doing it as a group or society.
Well, as a
So.
great communicator, if someone gives you the chance, you're able to explain it really well. And I
Well,
like,
hopefully, yeah, that's the goal. That's the end goal.
well, if I can understand it, anyone can understand it. What I like, based on the third part of your model, the expectations and meeting reality, where do you find whether individuals, leaders, or the organizations themselves are falling short with their expectation? Is there a common thread there that
Yeah, I think the thing that I see, and this is another long discussion, but there's a big discussion right now, especially with some of the people I've talked with in higher education, about the loss of critical thinking skills. When I'm thinking critical thinking skills, I'm thinking in terms of how do you look at the bigger picture of things?
Mhm,
How do you look at the, how the world interacts with each other, and how people make decisions based off of how broad their view is.
mhm,
Uh, and that's in contrast to binary thinking, which is the more of the us versus them, wrong versus right, which I
mhm,
find ironic because, when you look at computer systems, it's ones and zeros. So it's
mhm,
very binary, quote unquote, thinking. And so we are becoming more binary in our thinking, which I think is why you see so much divisiveness in politics, and people fighting for their one way or the other. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I have seen that's a challenge is how do you bring that to the discussion or to the table for people whenever they're trying to make things integrated or make things more cohesive. We're really I think struggling as a country, at least here in the United States, that way. I don't know if I could speak as well to
oh,
other
for yeah,
countries,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, but from what I hear from people, it seems to be a pretty common thread internationally. It is something that people are, not really working towards, and then when you look at that from a political point of view, what's that going to look like if your country looks like that? In fact, I was talking on LinkedIn with somebody from Switzerland, and they were telling me about I guess their system. I don't know anything about this, so I'll probably butcher it. So if anybody from Switzerland's listening, I apologize. But
Mhm,
uh, they were saying that they have more than two political systems, so you kind of have more choices.
mhm.
Whereas in the United States, it's kind of set up as a binary system. You're either this or you're that. And if you don't agree with the two, you're pretty much out of luck. And so, what does that mean as far as connectivity? How do we take a society and connect itself to that kind of a system? So
So
I got off track a little bit, but yeah,
no,
that's
it's
kind of
not. It's really
where
good because, as you said, it's going to be a long discussion, but I think it's really good, and it brings us to some clarity in what you're teaching and but it makes sense for me, and I believe it would make sense for listeners, and it's helpful as well. Is there a connection, would you say, where you say their focus in life? So whether it's the individuals, the worker, the leaders, or in the businesses, that they're lacking a focus in life along with the expectations, is that leading to improper expectations and back down into the foundation? So are you able to dig deep to say where this kind of starts, or is it just, it's going to be one or the other?
It's kind of a challenge because to me, there's these types of discussions have different layers to them.
Yes,
There's a
yes.
very superficial layer, which is, wrong, bad. And I really I've always had a very hard time going to that place because to me, if you're talking about trying to build strengthening or building something up, you're
Mhm.
not talking about good or bad or wrong or right. You're
Mhm.
talking about how do we come together as people to do something to make an impact or a difference. And so and that falls in with the whole critical thinking discussion. And so if you're talking about, the political structure and all, it's hard to say because first of all, you don't know what motivates the people that are running it.
Yeah.
You know, are their words and actions matching?
Mhm.
Sometimes no, sometimes yes. And so plus it's such a huge machine that I don't know if you could just say, well, this person's wrong because so many people are involved in that process. How do you weed out, the things that are making it broken and the things that are making it strong, because the bigger a system gets, the harder it is to kind of figure out
Mhm.
where the breakdowns are.
Accountability, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So to me, I always tell people, don't judge things as good or bad or wrong or right. Look at it from that other layer and think about fear too, because it's a pretty scary world we're in right now. There's a lot of very dangerous, actual dangerous things
Mhm.
happening, and so
Uncertainties, yes.
yeah, so we have to think in terms of, okay, if people are reacting fight or flight because they're fearful, that's a very different picture than people reacting from a place of critical thinking.
Mhm.
And so, to me, I would say that the biggest thing that could benefit is for more and more people to learn these critical thinking skills so that when they're making decisions, they're looking at it from a much broader perspective, because there are so many divisive things right now. And when I think of like diversity inclusions are a really big discussion right now, and if your focus is on how do you behave, okay, if our goal here is to strengthen the world, which that may not be everybody's goal, but just
Mhm.
speaking generally from the people I work with, normally they're wanting to strengthen the world. And so if you've got people that are wanting to do that, how do we as a person, a group of people decide, okay, what are our words going to be? How are we going to manage this? Then it really doesn't matter what color you are, what you believe, what your
Mhm.
religious affiliations are, as long as you all are working towards a common goal that has this foundational element of helpful or foundational element
Mhm.
of friendly. Everybody can do that. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter who you are, young, old, big, small, whatever. And so the focus then is driven to that word as opposed to the divisive stuff. See, and so that's the challenge, is how do you get people to see what that would do in changing our world? I mean, if you just visualize it right now without anything happening, what does that look like for you in the world as opposed to, well, the other, it just feels calmer. It feels more connected, Then when you actually do it, it's kind of nice because it does do that.
You as an educator are helping in, if it's remote or wherever it is you're able to go. So you're seeing a lot of the bad side. I mean, you said don't use the word bad.
Yeah.
Use
See,
you
where there you
I
go.
mean, I'm listening. But it's like a habit though, right? It's something you
Yeah,
have
it
to.
is. Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah.
You see some of you see sides of people where they can improve. And in
Mhm.
seeing the sides where they can improve and seeing those improvements or changes that they bring about themselves because of
Yeah.
the model that you showed them or some other tool that they are able to have at their disposal, what brings you the most satisfaction in the work that you're doing?
Oh, the most satisfaction is when you see somebody who goes from not understanding it at all to where it finally clicks. Because sometimes it can take upwards of a year to
Mhm.
really figure it out. And when they look at you, in fact, the thing I hear the most from people who have learned the model is the two things I hear the most are it's like magic, because all of a sudden here's somebody who's been angry or hostile or upset or frustrated all the time. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I see, that stuff really isn't going to be the end of my life. I'm safe and secure and the world is okay. And I can go from this place of power as opposed to this place of frustration. And the other thing I hear a lot is, how come nobody teaches this? I've never heard of this before. And so, it's just not something that is taught really, I think, to people, and I, like I said, I wasn't taught it growing up. I just happened upon it by reading a lot of books. I read a lot of books, and there was a common thread in all the books I was
Hmm.
reading, and it was like, wow, this may really be something.
And you
So
were able to deduce that
yeah,
and
yeah,
take it out and
exactly,
make it your own. So I think you
exactly.
call yourself a people in culture partner.
Yes.
And I think it's a very good description of someone, and it seems to be a great description of you. What would you like people to understand about that, about you? What do you
Oh,
think
well,
that
that's
they
actually,
don't understand? Not necessarily just the phrase, but understand about the work that you're trying to bring to people that
yeah,
they
actually,
probably don't understand.
it's funny you asked that, because, I've been doing this for a number of years now, and it was always the question, okay, what do I call you? What do you do? In fact, I have a gal she's the president of an owner of a mortgage company, and I work with her employees. And she says, I never know how to describe you because I don't really know, what you do per se. And I said, yeah, that's a challenge, because that goes back to the whole thing about the vocabulary and
Mm,
that sense of what it feels like to be in that place. And for people who have that inherently while I'm talking, they're going to be nodding their head probably as they're listening, going, yeah, yeah, I know what she means. But if you don't understand that connectivity, then it's a very amazing thing to watch somebody go from not, just being angry at the world or being hostile or frustrated or mad at people all the time, to being able to say, you know what, that really doesn't matter. It's not, they're not attacking me. It's just something that's happening connectivity wise. And so I'd say probably that's the thing that brings me the most joy, when I can see somebody let go of all that fear or let go of all that frustration, or it's that mentality, and go to, hey, it's okay, the world, even though there's challenges out there, I can stay calm, and I can use my word, and I can make sure my words and actions match. And even if nobody appreciates it, I can always appreciate that in myself. And so I think that's probably the thing that brings you the most joy, is being able to reconnect something, to that.
and it's interesting how you said to get people to understand people and culture partner. It's your friend or the person you're working with, because some of the jobs like, oh, he's a lawyer, or he's my boss. But
Right.
maybe she finds that you're so kind and you're a partner for her, that there's not one specific label that she can find for you, and she
Yeah.
finds you enduring and she finds you kind. It's like, this is my friend, or
Yeah.
whatever it may be, that it,
Yeah.
but she doesn't want to introduce you as friend because she has to give you a title, so that someone
Yeah.
knows
Yeah.
where you come from. So it's interesting how that will play out in your actual.
Yeah, I tried a connectivity expert, but that didn't really work. Nobody could even figure out what that was. So I was like, okay. So I've had a number of practice runs on what to call it. So this one seems to be working very well right now. So because it does, I think, better describe, that you're looking for ways to integrate people, and make them see that we can work together and we can achieve amazing things whenever we are tied together and strengthened in things, as opposed to being opposed to each other and fighting each other. And so, that's the thing you see in all cultures. If you look at a community where people have high connectivity, it's an amazing place to go. But whenever there's a lot of divisiveness and fighting, then that's a much different picture. So
Dr. Reed, how do you stay connected, or how do you stay productive and keep going?
Ooh,
What is
interesting.
driving you?
Connected, I'm a big one for family. I have a wonderful family. I have lots of friends that I care for and who, really,
You live in
we
Texas, of all
very
places.
foster.
You
Yes.
have
Oh, I
no
know.
problems there.
Yeah, well, see, I'm not a true Texan. I have to be honest. I'm from Illinois originally, but I've lived in Texas for 30 years or more. So I do consider myself, kind of a Texan now. Although, some of the ones who have been here for 3 or 4 generations, may not
They
agree.
still may not
Yeah,
take it.
yeah. I have friends who are, who've been here for generations, and we've enjoyed it, and we've lived close to Austin. We've never lived in Austin, but we've always lived right outside. So, which it's a wonderful town. We love Austin. So, we like their motto of "Keep Austin Weird," because it does truly exemplify, the community. They are a really fun group of people who have tried to keep it very authentic, I think. So, but yeah, but then as far as the productive, I think it's always having some purpose in your life,
Hmm.
whether it be uh, personal or professional. Some people are in a position, and I can kind of sympathize with this, having been raised the way I was, that they have to have a job, they have to make money. It's not about enjoying their work. It's
Hmm.
about bringing home a paycheck.
Paying the bills. Yeah.
And if you have to have that, how do you keep your words in place, and how do you keep yourself motivated? And so, I've been very blessed to be able to shift out of that kind of a lifestyle into something different. And so that's what I would say to people is, even if you're stuck in a job that you don't really like and you want to make a change and there's something you truly love, there's all kinds of paths you can take. That goes back to that binary versus critical thinking.
Mm.
Binary thinking is, I can't do that. Critical thinking is, okay, I want to do that. So how do I
Wow.
get there? What steps do I need to take to get there? And so, to me, I try to stay productive with things that I love, and taking myself down paths that are going to take me to the things that I like and want to do. And like you brought up the songwriting and the photography, I do
Mm.
those pretty much every week, just for fun, just to say, hey, this is something I love to do. And maybe one day it will become, more than that. But
Hmm.
I have to think in terms of, where would I want that to go? Who do I need to contact to do that? And so you never know where your word's going to take you.
In terms of being productive, do you have a favorite tool or something that you use that it helps you be efficient in your work? It could be your headphones, it could be a pencil, it could be your chair. Is there just something, maybe a favorite teddy bear? I don't know,
Yeah.
but just something that it helps you, um, keeps you going. It's just something that you always go to, or just something you need in your line of
Yeah,
work.
actually, I've never been asked that question before, but interestingly enough, I would have to say that, and ironically, because I'm in kind of connectivity, is my computer.
Hmm.
Because, growing up, we didn't have computers. And
Hmm.
so you had to find books, you had to go to the library, you had to search for information. And I've always been an avid reader, and love to read. And so when the internet came around, I could find everything. It was like this magic book where you could go and read books on it. You could learn about different cultures. You could talk to, now you can talk to people in different parts of the world, and in real time see, what's happening. And so it's always, to me, I think, exciting to open up my quote unquote book and see, what's out there, what I haven't learned, what I, would like to know about a culture, so that I can better understand it. Or, how do you, how would I apply my work in the country you're in
Yeah,
now, because I've never
absolutely.
been there. So I would have to learn through talking to people like you, or, learning the culture that way.
And
So,
it's kind of shocking if we think about the number of people that do not have, or who do not have access
yeah,
to a computer yet. I
right.
mean, there's a whole lot of opportunity left to, divulge into, or to give other people opportunities.
Yeah.
Dr. Reed, what is your number maybe even for some of these people that may get onto a computer soon, your number one top tip for people getting into work?
Getting what now?
Into work. So thinking as the young lemonade stand girl or getting your first job at a college, just a top tip for people getting into work or even changing their career. Maybe they take a program and they say, maybe
Yeah.
I'm in the wrong position.
My top tip would be to think about what brings you joy and then come up with at least 10 to 20 ways you could get there,
Yeah.
and then start researching and looking for the things that are going to take you from where you are to where you want to go. And also making sure that you recognize it may not take you where you think you want to go. Because if I had ever said, well, I'm going this way and that's the only way I'm going, then I would have missed out on all the little signs and messages and clues that the world gave me that told me, no, go this way. So really listen to that and research it, because I think if you look at it just from one place, you're going to lose it. Because if you're too much, I got to research, I got to do all this, I got to find a way mentally, and you don't listen with that heart part or that visceral part,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to miss out on stuff. But if you only do it from the visceral part, you're going to miss out because you're not doing the research and figuring out which way to go. So do both and find that path that integrates those two things as best you can.
Speaking of missing things or listening to others, is there something that you wished you would have known when you were younger that
Oh,
you do
I
know
was
now?
younger. You mean younger as in in my childhood
Yeah,
years
yeah.
or in
I mean,
college?
well, usually all advice is good advice, no matter the age.
Oh, okay,
It's a
okay. Good
timeless
point,
truth.
good point.
But
I would say the thing that would stick out the most to me is for people who are in high school, who are getting ready to go to
mhm,
college, um, that you
get married
recognize.
after the third year.
Do what now?
To get married after the third year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. My daughters are always saying, what were you thinking? I was like, I don't know. I was young. I didn't know what. Back in those days, people just got married younger, so we didn't even.
Were you and your husband ready for your children to come home and say, "Hey, mom, dad, third year, we're ready to get
Yeah.
married"?
Yeah. We were always
Get
like,
back to
whatever
school.
brings you joy.
Yeah, that's great.
Luckily, I had that in place young. Is the not worrying about what didn't bring. If I wanted, I always wanted my kids to say, "Look, I found the path that
We're
was
in
right,"
love. Yeah, yeah.
and then we help them get there, which is always nice. But if you don't have parents or people that are there to guide you, then to me, that's the thing I would say is go out and find mentors, go learn about things and other people, because even if your parents can't or won't help you, or you're in a position where it's all about just making a living, you can make a living, but then go find other things that bring you joy and try to navigate your way from where you are, where you just have to make money, to the place where you can do whatever you love to do. Because if you're good at doing the hard work of those retail jobs or things like that, then if you have that work ethic to do that, then
Mhm.
that can lead you directly to where you really want to be in the end. And I think the biggest challenge when you're younger is that you're so impatient for it to happen now, that it's hard to see that if you work on something now, it's going to be, 5 years from now, you're going to have a different place. And I didn't, there were things I didn't know, and nobody taught it to me, and
Mhm.
nobody helped me learn them. And I had to go out and search for them. And so I think that is something that, the younger generation, especially that population that doesn't have somebody saying, hey, here's where you need to go, here's what you need to do, take advantage of. If you say, gosh, I want to be a nurse, well, I'd say go be a candy striper, go
Yeah.
meet with nurses, go try to find a job somewhere that's going to build that picture of who you want to be. And if you don't know who you want to be yet, go and explore that. Say, what do I love to do? In fact, going back to my spirituality roots, there's a guy named Parker Palmer who probably a lot of people know, and he actually, I was reading one of his books, and he said, think about what you loved when you were a child, and then use that kind of as your basis for
Mhm.
deciding what vocation you want to go towards. Because if you love building things, if you love getting in there and working on cars, if you loved doing your Legos or building things, architect, what things did you love to do as a child, and then see if you can translate that into the things that you could love to do as an adult. So that's something that I read that really stuck with me when I was going through the process.
Yeah, I heard that from someone not too long ago that it's something between when the ages of 1 and 10. Something that you did a lot of when you were a kid. I have
Yeah,
trouble
yeah,
I have trouble remembering that.
yeah,
I
yeah. You and me both.
I also wonder too, like I think, why didn't people tell me these good bits of advice that I'm hearing now? But I'd like to go through life and see if I just actually had my ears plugged and I just wasn't listening. So there's
Yeah, yeah,
probably all
yeah,
of that advice was around and circulating that we hear,
yeah,
but
yeah,
it just
yeah.
we weren't really ready to listen. And
Yeah.
that
Well,
was
and
a
it's hard
mistake of
because,
mine.
even in high school, this sounds really weird, and this will be my speech coming out again, but your brain isn't completely formed until you're like in your 20s.
Or
And so
40s
it
for
may
me.
be very difficult for you to overcome, the fact that you're, thinking, okay, I'm having fun, I love life and all of
Yeah.
that. But, that's the hard thing too, is there's not one set of things you could say, because everybody's life experience is so different. There's some people who are in poverty. I did a little work in Head Start in Montgomery, Alabama, of all places. And I loved it. It was probably one of my favorite work experiences, because the way they had the Head Starts back then was they were right in the middle of the lower income housing, like you used to call it the projects.
Hmm.
And so I'd have to go in to these projects and drive in, and I'd pretty much be the only Caucasian person there, but they
Hmm.
treated me so wonderfully. I never felt uh, like I wasn't, appreciated, or I never felt in danger, which
Yeah.
was ironic because there were a lot of shootings going on in these areas and all.
Hmm.
But it was such a good experience for me to have, because I got to see another way that people live that was so different than my way of living, that it gave me a different perspective and empathy for it. And so, I would also tell people to travel as much as
Yeah.
they can, because when you meet people from different cultures,
Yeah.
like you're doing, you do have a different perspective of the world, because it's not all about what you learned growing up. So, that's another thing that young people can do, I think, to really expand their views of the world and how they do things.
In terms of experiences, Dr. Reed, in your work that you do now, what is maybe a mistake, one of the biggest mistakes, if you would allow us to know, but something that you've learned from that mistake or one of those mistakes that maybe it's
Well,
humbled
I
you a bit?
I have learned that I cannot change people.
Hmm.
I can I can
Trying to at first, I
I can
guess,
spend
obviously.
hours working
Hmm.
with somebody
Yeah.
and teaching them a model, but I cannot change people. And I think that's a really hard thing for people to know, because sometimes this has been my experience, is when you couldn't, back in the day when I was first kind of learning this model, um, you used to use the model almost as a safety blanket, but it wasn't truly ingrained, because the way I can tell when somebody has ingrained the model is when it doesn't matter what other people do or think.
Mm.
Because a lot of times we're using it to say, okay, if I do this model, I'm a really good person, and therefore everybody's going to like me. So I'm going to do the model for that reason. And then somebody doesn't like you. Well, totally blows you out the water,
This
because here you're
doesn't
thinking,
work.
if I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. And so I think, I've learned over the years that, it's kind of like, that's why I like to call it a toolbox, is because I'm not coming in to fix people. I'm not
Mhm.
coming in to change people. I'm coming in to say, hey, here's some skill sets you can
Mhm.
use if you want them to change the entire perspective you have on the world, so that you don't have to be frustrated all the time, so you don't have to be angry all the time, and you get to choose whether you use it or not. So that's the big one I think I had to learn, was not being able to fix everybody. So
Dr. Lynette Reed, is there any parting advice that you would be able to give to my listeners getting into work, maybe frustrated with their work, grinding their wheels, not very certain of their place in life? Maybe their expectations are too high, maybe too low. Their focus is not where it should be. Maybe they don't even have a foundation from which to stand. Is there any
yeah.
advice that you can offer to some of my listeners?
Oh, wow. That's I've had that question before, and it's really hard in some ways because people are so different that
Yeah.
it's really hard to say there's this one thing that's going to help
Mhm.
people. But I think what I find is that people who are willing to look at that broader picture, have those critical thinking skills to say the world isn't black or white, yes or no,
Mhm.
wrong or right. There are shades of gray all within that, and learn how that works, how those shades of grays work. That's probably the best starting point, because to me it's about perspective. Um, One of the biggest examples I use for that is, I can't remember, my mind's gone blank. It's too early in the morning, but there was a psychologist who was in the Holocaust. Probably a lot of the people who know what I'm talking about will remember his name, but um, he wrote a book about his Holocaust experiences, and as a psychologist, and he said that there were two types of people he noticed in the concentration camps. This is getting a little dark for your question, but I think
No,
it's a
it's
really
good.
good example.
It's good.
That there were the people who would share their last crumb of bread to help keep somebody alive, and there were people who would hoard their bread and not share it with anybody. And the point that I took from that was that even in the most horrific situations, you have a choice.
Mhm.
Even if everybody around you is dying, which is the worst possible scenario you can almost think of in many ways, there is a choice you have in how you do things. And so to me, that would be kind of my advice to people, is recognize you have more than one choice. You have many choices in how you treat people, how you make choices about where you want to be in your career, all of those things. And so think in terms of, what are the thousands of options I have, and which one resonates with me to get me where I want to go. So, that's probably the best one I could give as far as for that volume of people.
No, it's right in line with what you're saying, because that binary way of thinking, it's either this or that, however we wanted to define it, and no one really fits there. So when
Yeah,
people start to think, well, I'm either this or that, when I'm not this or that, then where do I fit? And then they're discouraged, and that leads to a path of
exactly.
a
Yeah,
self-destruction of sorts and
right.
being lost in this world. But I think what you're saying is people have purpose, and and
Yeah,
there's a
exactly.
good,
Yeah,
it's a good place for them to be. It's just they need to find it for themselves. We can't just tell everyone what it is they need to be
right,
doing.
right. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lynette Reed. Where can people reach you?
Well, the best way is you can go to my website, which is www.expectations2reality.com. It's or you can just Google Dr. Lynette Reed, and then also my I do a monthly writing with MPUG, which is a project management organization. So if
Mhm.
you Google Dr. Lynette Reed, MPUG, which may be easier for typing purposes, it'll pull up a lot of my information there. And then it also has all of the articles I've written. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the work I do and kind of the perspectives, that's a good place to go to read some of the articles and all. So a couple of different ways.
My final question for you, Dr. Reed. Why do you work?
Why do I work? Well, I work for purpose, for financial. You know, we all want to make money,
Mhm.
and I work because I do believe that the work that I do does help to strengthen the people that I am around. And so that is something that is obviously very important to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this career.
Dr. Lynette Reed, educator, author, podcaster, photographer, songwriter,
Yeah.
and very helpful leader in her profession. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.